Hello everyone, welcome back to another deck profile for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. This time for the Anti-Spell Festival event duel. Now the rule for this festival is, all spell cards are banned. From searchers to extenders, to field clearing and interruptions, spell cards have evolved to become a very crucial part of every deck. Most decks lose much of their consistency without any spell cards, and some decks simply cannot function without them. That leaves us to question, which deck can we use effectively for this festival? A deck that doesn't use any spell cards, and even trap cards for that matter. Rocketing straight from the Arc 5 anime, we have the Superheavy Samurais. Superheavy Samurai is an archetype of Earth machine monsters who have a gimmick of being able to attack in defense position. In doing so, they use their defense points instead of their attack points for damage calculation. Combined with that ability, they also boast very high defense points, meaning they act as both heavy hitters and walls your opponent will have a hard time beating over by battle. Being able to attack in defense position means that, while you can damage your opponent when you attack, you don't take battle damage from your opponent's attacks, since your monsters are in defense position. Staying in defense position also protects your monsters from things like Mirror Force or Lightning Storm. Also, since they have relatively low attack points and they don't really use their attack points at all, cards that care about attack points are not effective against this deck. They are an all-monster deck, meaning the whole deck is nothing but monster cards, because most of their cards require having no spell or trap cards in your graveyard. They have a sub-archetype called the Superheavy Samurai Soul. The Souls act as equip spells for your monsters, giving you advantages or increasing your monster's defenses. This deck's main playstyle is OTK, which means it's a going second deck. This deck's main weakness is that it has almost non-existent protection against card effects, and very minimal interruptions or negates, especially during your opponent's turn. Another weakness this deck has is that it's very reliant on its normal summon. If your normal summon somehow gets negated or destroyed, and you don't have another monster that can special summon itself from your hand, your turn is pretty much over. With all those weaknesses aside though, this deck can hit very hard, and they can go through a lot of interruptions, which makes it a perfect OTK deck. Like the title suggests, the Superheavy Samurai archetype is quite cheap in Master Duel. If you look at the secret pack, Immovable Samurais, you can see that there are no UR main deck monsters, and only 3 SR main deck monsters. All the URs are extra deck monsters, and you really only need to play one of each. In fact, you can get away with only playing 2 of the URs. Now let me show you the deck list. Now I'm going to run through the deck list very quickly and explain how each card works later on. So we have 2 Superheavy Samurai Soul Horns, 3 Soul Peacemaker, 2 Maxis, 1 Soul Fire Suit, 2 Trumpeteers, 2 Battle Ball, 1 Soul Bang Cannon, 3 Flutist, 2 Giga Gloves, 2 Ash Blossom, 3 Scales, 3 Soul Piercer, 3 Magnet, 3 Wagons, 1 Pankertops, 2 Big Benkei, a Kaiju of your choice, 2 Thieves, and 2 General Coral. And for the extra deck we have 1 Musashi, 1 Shutendoji, 1 Stealth Ninja, 1 Crystal Wing, 1 Ninja Sarutobi, 1 Kyubi, 1 Susanoo, 1 Barome, and 1 Steam Train King, and 3 of the Scarecrows. And that's pretty much it. If you're already familiar with how the deck works, you can skip to the end for the battle showcase, as I'm going to explain how each card works from this point on. Let's start with the Superheavy Samurai Souls. All Super Heavy Samurai souls can equip themselves from the hand or field to a Super Heavy Samurai monster you control. While they are equipped, they either gain an effect or give the equipped monster additional effects. A fun thing to note is that this equip effect is not once per turn. So if your equip effect gets negated without it getting destroyed with something like Gravedigger's Trap Hole, you can attempt to equip the soul to your monsters again. The first one is Super Heavy Samurai Soul Horns. Soul Horn allows the equipped monster to attack twice per battle phase. Double attacking is always good, especially on an OTK deck. While equipped, it can special summon itself to the field, giving you an extra body for more plays. Super Heavy Samurai Soul Peacemaker is both a starter and an extender. Its equip effect doesn't really matter, it just prevents your opponent from attacking a different monster. But its second effect lets you tribute the equipped monster to special summon a Super Heavy Samurai monster from your deck. This lets you cheat out any Super Heavy Samurai monster you would need from your deck. Just watch out for Ash Blossom. Super Heavy Samurai Soul Fire Suit is unique in that you would never want to equip this to your monsters. Its equip effect just turns the equipped monster to level 5, which is very useless. But its second effect lets you discard this card from your hand during either player's turn to make one of your defense position Super Heavy Samurai monster unable to be destroyed by battle or card effect for the rest of this turn. Your monster does lose 800 defense, but that's trivial compared to the protection it gains. This card is the only good protection this archetype have against card effects, as most of their protections are battle focused. Next, Super Heavy Samurai Soul Bang Cannon increases your monster's defense by 1000. That's a decent defense boost actually, but it also has a very good second effect. During the battle phase, if your opponent activates a card effect while you control a defense position Super Heavy Samurai monster, you can banish this card from the graveyard to negate that card's activation, and then destroy it. Then, if that card was destroyed, it destroys all monsters on the field and inflict 1000 damage to both players. This is one of the only 2 negates this archetype have, and it is very specific with its activation requirement. During the battle phase, when your opponent activates a card or effect, while you control defense position Super Heavy Samurai monsters, while your house is on fire and it's snowing outside, you get the point. But having access to a negate is always good, that's why I play this card. Do keep in mind that this also destroys your own monsters, though you could always change Soul Fire Suit to this card to prevent your own monsters from being destroyed. A ruling to remember is that this is a then effect, meaning the negated card has to be destroyed by this effect in order for you to destroy all monsters on the field. Just keep that in mind when you're trying to use the destroy all monsters on the field effect of this card. And lastly, we have Super Heavy Samurai Soul Piercer, one of the most important card in this deck. It gives the equipped monster piercing, which is a decent effect, but that's not what's important. The better effect is that if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard in any way, you can add 1 Super Heavy Samurai monster from your deck to your hand except a copy of itself. Now this search effect is already good, but what's even more amazing is that this effect has no once per turn clause. This is one of the best thing about the Super Heavy Samurai archetype. Some of their cards just don't have once per turn clauses, meaning you can keep looping their effects over and over again. With Soul Piercer, you can gain a lot of card advantage if you are able to keep looping its effect. Not only is it a good search card, but it's a search card that can keep on searching if you play it right. Now that's all the Super Heavy Samurai souls in this deck. Now let's go to the tuners of this deck. There are 2 tuners, and they are both level 2. The first one is Superheavy Samurai Trumpeter. If you have no spell or trap card in your graveyard, Trumpeter can special summon itself from your hand for no cost. And like Soul Piercer, this effect has no once per turn clause. So you can keep special summoning Trumpeter from your hand as long as you can find a way to return it back to your hand. However, if you special summon it this way, it locks you into Superheavy Samurai monsters for the rest of the turn. But that is not a problem most of the time. And since you almost never tribute summon in this deck, Trumpeter's second effect rarely goes off. The other tuner is Superheavy Samurai Battle Ball. Now Battle Ball has a very unique effect. If all monsters you control are Superheavy Samurai monsters, and you have no spell or trap cards in your graveyard, you can target one of your opponent's monster that has a level, send both Battle Ball and that monster to the graveyard to cheat out any Superheavy Samurai Synchro monster from your extra deck, as long as the combined level of both monsters in the graveyard is equal to the level of the Synchro monster you are special summoning. So it's like you're Synchro summoning using your opponent's monsters. It is even treated as a Synchro summon, so you don't lose out on anything. Battle Ball allows you to get rid of problematic monsters that cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect. With how good this card is, however, I only play 2 copies because its effect is sadly once per turn, and playing too many copies can clog up your hand. Also, do remember that if you use this effect on a Pendulum monster, you won't be able to cheat out any Synchro monsters, because Pendulum monsters are sent to the extra deck when they leave the field, and this effect checks the original level of both monsters in the graveyards. Now those are the only tuners I play. This deck searches a lot, so getting to your tuners is rarely a problem. Now let's move on to the other main deck monsters, starting with Superheavy Samurai Flutist. Flutist can tribute itself to special summon a Superheavy Samurai monster from your hand. Now that's an inherent -1, especially if you're not special summoning a high-leveled monster. But that's because Flutist belongs in the graveyard. Its second effect is, if your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a Superheavy Samurai monster you control, you can banish this card from the graveyard to negate and destroy that card. This protects your monsters from so many things, especially from infinite impermanence, which also negates your monster's ability to attack in defense position, by the way. So you can see how important this card is. Next we have is Superheavy Samurai Giga Gloves. If Giga Glove is sent to the graveyard, you can rearrange the top 5 cards of your deck. That doesn't really matter most of the time. What's good is its second effect, where when your opponent declares a direct attack, you can excavate the top card of your deck. Then, if it's a Superheavy Samurai monster, you can add it to your hand and reduce the attack of the attacking monster to 0 permanently. Now a battle trap in 2022 doesn't sound too enticing, but this is a great follow-up card in case you fail the OTK on your turn, especially in a festival where there's no Called by the Grave. Also, most players don't see this coming, because less and less players play battle traps these days. It not only will protect you from a direct attack, but it also gives you a card in hand and leaves your opponent with a 0 attack monster that you can run over on your next turn. Next is Superheavy Samurai Scales. If your opponent controls 2 or more monsters and you have no monsters on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Superheavy Samurai monster from your graveyard. Scales is your primary recovery card and is also a great extender. It not only special summons itself, but it also revives a Superheavy Samurai monster from your graveyard, allowing you to further your plays. When Superheavy Samurai Magnet is normal summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Superheavy Samurai monster from your hand. Since most of your monsters are level 4 or lower, this effect is always live. Its second effect prevents your opponent from attacking a different monster. Meaning, if you have 2 of these on the field, your opponent cannot attack at all. This was a solid strategy years ago, but since almost all decks have at least 1 or more ways to get rid of monsters without battling, it is not useful anymore. The last lower leveled monster is Superheavy Samurai Wagon, a very important card. When it's summoned, it can change its battle position. Then, while Wagon is in defense position, you can change it to attack position to search for any of your Superheavy Samurai souls from your deck. This card allows you to search for Soul Piercer, which is your main playmaker. That is enough of a reason to play 3 of this card. And now we go to the higher leveled Superheavy Samurai monsters. Starting with the poster boy of the archetype, Superheavy Samurai Big Benkei. Big Benkei's effect is very simple. It allows your other Superheavy Samurai monsters to attack in defense position. And with 3500 defense, that packs quite a punch. You see, up to this point, none of the monsters I showed you earlier can attack in defense position on their own, except for Wagon. Only Big Benkei, Wagon, and all Synchro monsters can inherently attack in defense position, with only Big Benkei giving this effect to all your other Superheavy Samurai monsters. And since most Superheavy Samurai monsters have higher defense than attack, they would want that effect. I play 2 of this because I like having 1 in hand and 1 in the deck, but you can definitely go with just 1. Next is Superheavy Samurai Thief. Now Thief has a very interesting effect. It can special summon itself from your hand with no cost, just like Trumpeteer. And then, as its name suggests, you can tribute this card to steal one of your opponent's back rows, or one of their cards in their pendulum zone. In a very trap-oriented event, Thief has been very invaluable to the playstyle. Also, neither of these effects is once per turn, but it does lock you into Superheavy Samurai monsters for the rest of the turn. And lastly, the Superheavy Samurai archetype do have 2 pendulum monsters, but you never really pendulum summon in it. Because for one, the monsters themselves can special summon each other easily already without needing to pendulum summon. And secondly, the scales only go from 1 to 8, meaning you can't even pendulum summon Big Benkei to cheat him out. But one of the pendulum card has a very useful effect for the OTK, and that is Superheavy Samurai General Coral. General Coral's pendulum effect is that when your Superheavy Samurai monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, it can attack again in a row. Like I said, very useful for the OTK. However, this effect doesn't stack with Soul Horn's double attacking, so keep that in mind when you're trying to use this effect. It won't let you attack 3 times. Its effect on the field lets you draw cards, but I rarely use it. I play 2 of this, but I'm planning on taking 1 away as it is a very win more card. Now that's pretty much it for the main deck. The others are just stable cards. With no Called by the Grave, hand traps are now more powerful. And Max C is the king of all hand traps. Ash Blossom is there to prevent yourself from getting Max C'd. It also provides interruption, so your opponent won't set up too strong of a board on their turn. Pankratops and Kaijus are there as board breakers. You can play 2 Pankratops and another Kaiju if you feel that your opponent keeps building boards too strong to overcome with just your Superheavy Samurais. But do remember that the more non-Superheavy Samurai monsters you play, the less consistent your deck becomes. Now let's move on to the extra deck. I'm going to say it out front that you will barely play most of these Synchro monsters. The most used ones are Shutendoji, Susanoo, and Thomas the Tank Engine, because their levels match your monsters the most. You see, most of your monsters are level 4. and all your tuners are level 2. So the easiest levels you can go to are 6, 10, and 12. So why must we play one of each synchro monsters then? It's because of this card, Battle Ball. To maximize Battle Ball's effect to synchro summon using any of your opponent's monsters, you must have at least one of each level you can summon using its effect. But if you're running low on crafting materials, especially UR crafting materials, you can live with just playing Shutendoji, Susanoo, and Steam Train King, and probably 2 of the Scarecrows. Now let's go through this very quickly, starting with the level 5 Super Heavy Samurai Swordsmaster, Musashi. When Musashi is synchro summoned, you can add one machine type monster from your graveyard to your hand. If you add back Trumpeteer, you can special summon it, then synchro the level 7. Or you can add back one of the souls from your graveyard. Like I mentioned earlier, all Super Heavy Samurai synchro monsters can attack while in defense position. I'll say it now so I won't repeat myself later on. For the level 6, we have Super Heavy Samurai Ogre, Shutendoji. This is one of the most used synchro monster in this deck. When Shutendoji is synchro summoned, you can destroy all spell and trap cards your opponent controls. In a very trap-oriented event, this can single-handedly defeat your opponent, especially those playing a lot of trap cards. It can also force your opponent to activate their traps prematurely, allowing a safer path for the OTK. I even considered playing 2 copies at one point because of how useful this card is. For the level 7, we have Super Heavy Samurai Stealth Ninja. Stealth Ninja can attack directly by halving its original defense. If it's destroyed by a card effect, it can special summon itself back during the next standby phase. Now I rarely use this card, so I can't say how useful this card is, but I can see the potential of being able to attack directly. It's just that this deck cannot summon the odd-numbered synchro monsters easily. The level 8 is Super Heavy Samurai Ninja, Sarutobi. Sarutobi's effect is, once per turn, during either player's turn, it can destroy one spell or trap card on the field as a quick effect, then inflict 500 damage to your opponent. Sarutobi is one of those monsters I wish I could summon more often, but like Stealth Ninja, this deck cannot synchro summon level 8s easily. Also, its effect is pretty much the same as Thief's, and Thief is way easier to search and summon than this. Speaking of hard to summon, we have Super Heavy Samurai Beast QB for the level 9. This is the least used synchro monster in this deck. In fact, I didn't even have this card in my deck until only recently, when I started facing more level 7 monsters. QB's effect is very simple. It gains 900 defense for each special summon monster your opponent controls. So if your opponent has a full board of special summon monsters, this can go all the way up to 7900 defense. But that's not likely to happen. Having a big defense is useful for the OTK, but its level is just too awkward to summon by yourself. You will most likely only summon this monster using Battle Ball's effect. For the level 10, we have Super Heavy Samurai Warlord, Susanoo. Susanoo is tied with Shutendoji as the most used synchro monster in this deck. Susanoo's effect is similar to Thief, except it steals your opponent's spell or trap card from their graveyard, and it's also a quick effect. Now Susanoo's effect is very fun to use, but also very situational. If your opponent doesn't use any generic spell or trap cards, you will not be able to steal anything useful from them. It does banish the card after you steal it, so you can prevent the floating effects of some spell or trap cards. It also has 3800 defense, so it can beat over most monsters by battle. Susanoo is your go-to synchro monster because Big Benkei plus any of your level 2 tuners equals Susanoo. Also, a lot of players play level 8 monsters, so this can be special summoned using Battle Ball's effect very easily. And surprisingly, we don't have a level 11 synchro monster. So we skip to the end with the level 12 Superheavy Samurai Steam Train King. Now this card is a game ender. You can discard up to 2 cards to destroy that many cards your opponent controls. Then, once per turn, you can banish all spell and trap cards in both graveyards and inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card banished. With 4800 defense, you can see how this card can win you the game, especially when equipped with Soul Horn. Its summoning requirement is kinda hard, requiring 2 non-tuner monsters, but this can be easily brought out using Battle Ball's effect. And you will be surprised with how many level 10 monsters people play. Now last but not least, we have the only Link monster, Superheavy Samurai Scarecrow. Scarecrow is this deck's best extender. It is a Link 1 that requires any Superheavy Samurai monster as Link material. Its effect is, you can discard 1 monster to special summon any Superheavy Samurai monster from your graveyard to a zone discard points to, so bottom left. This can include the same monster you just discarded to activate this effect. For example, you can discard Big Benkei from your hand and special summon the same Big Benkei from your graveyard. The monster summoned by this effect is also not negated. So if you brought back Scales, you can revive another Superheavy Samurai monster from your graveyard. Or if you brought back Wagon, you can still search using its effect. Scarecrow is also your #1 way of triggering Soul Piercer's search effect. You can summon any Superheavy Samurai monster, equip Soul Piercer to it, then link that monster away for Scarecrow. This gives you a search from Soul Piercer, since it was sent from the field to the graveyard. Or, you can use Soul Piercer itself as the link material to summon Scarecrow. Get a search from that. Then use Scarecrow's effect to bring back the same Soul Piercer to give you another search. This is why this card is the best extender of this deck, and why you have to play 3 copies of it. It does have an effect that prevents you from taking any battle damage involving it, but that's not useful most of the time. It sadly also cannot be used as link material, because if you can easily link climb in this deck. The bottom left zone of Scarecrow is very important, so be very careful where you summon your monsters in this deck. You can easily block the bottom left zone of Scarecrow, preventing you from using its effects. Now that's all the Superheavy Samurai extra deck monsters. The other 2 are staples. With Big Benkei and any of your level 2 tuners, you can easily summon Baron de Fleur in this deck, and having an Omni Negate is very good. You do sometimes get locked into Superheavy Samurai monsters only, so be careful when you're trying to summon Baron de Fleur. The other one is Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Crystal Wing is harder to summon, but you do summon Shutendoji a lot in this deck, and Shutendoji plus any of your level 2 tuners equals Crystal Wing. Now that's pretty much it for the deck list. Let's move on to the next section. Now for some honorable mentions of cards you can add to this deck. Big Waraji can special summon itself from your hand for no cost, just like Trumpeteer, but it does nothing on the field. Soul Bead gives the equipped monster a once per turn protection against card effects, but Soulfire Suit is better because it's a quick effect and it protects your monster from both battle and card effects for the rest of the turn. Blue Brawler and Blowtorch for being indestructible by battle, but since this is an OTK deck, you don't need to play defensively. Soulbuster Glove is something that I actually missed, and I will definitely replace either one Magnet or one General Coral for a copy of this. It doubles the original defense of one of your super heavy samurai monsters during damage calculation, just like Honest, which makes OTKing easier. Swordsman has a very neat effect of reducing the attack and defense of all monsters that battle your super heavy samurai monsters to 0, but only after damage calculation. So like the wise man of Arc 5 once said, you still take the damage. Soul Shield Wall gives 1200 defense, but Soul Bang Cannon's second effect is more useful, even if the defense boost is higher. Fist is a tuner that can synchro summon during the battle phase, but I feel that it's a win more card. Helper and Giga Gloves are very similar cards. They both have an effect that triggers when your opponent declares a direct attack. The difference being, Helper revives a super heavy samurai monster, while Giga Gloves lets you draw a card and sets the attacking monster's attack to 0. Helper also has a discard effect that combines the defense of 2 super heavy samurai monsters on the field, which is a useful effect for the OTK strategy. But I ended up going for Giga Glove, but you can definitely replace one copy of Giga Glove for Helper. Gear Spring can special summon itself as long as all monsters in your graveyard are machine types. It can also reduce the attack of one of your opponent's monster to 0, and Gear Spring plus any of your level 2 tuners equals Baron de Fleur. However, if you use even one of your hand traps, this card is basically dead. Gear Gigant lets you search or recover your lower leveled super heavy samurais. Scareclaw Tryhard changes all monsters on the field into defense position. Super heavy samurai monsters love being in defense position, meaning this will only negatively affect your opponent. Side note, the whole Scareclaw archetype is basically a love child between super heavy samurais and Crusadia. And finally, when spell cards are legal again, you can play Sekka's Light. Sekka's Light is basically Pot of Greed. It even banishes itself from the graveyard, so it won't interfere with your monsters that require having no spell or trap cards in your graveyard. However, if you use Sekka's Light, you won't be able to use any other spell or trap cards for the rest of the duel. This means that you can't use Soul Peacemaker's second effect, since it's treated as a spell card while equipped. It also prevents you from using any of your Pendulum cards, and any spell or trap cards you stole from your opponent using Susanoo or Thieves' effect. So you have to decide if the benefits outweigh the cost of using Sekka's Light. In the time that I started making this video, Konami has released its first support for super heavy samurai monsters since 2018, the last one being Scarecrow. And so far, they are all pretty good, except for Shanao. The best one is definitely Bike, which lets you search for any super heavy samurai monster from your deck. Its level changing effect also allows for more varied synchro plays, making level 8 synchros now easier to summon. Spy is basically Susanoo and Thief combined into one card, but unlike Thief, its effects are sadly once per turn. Soul Gaia Booster is basically just a free level 4 body. Its equip effect seems useless for me, as you don't need tuners that badly in this deck. The 2 new Pendulum cards provide searching and extending powers for this archetype. It basically lets you easily summon the new level 12 Synchro, plus lets you add a soul from your deck to your hand. Masurao finally gives what this archetype lacks the most, card effect protection. It also lets you draw cards, giving you a chance to push for a game or recover from a loss. Shanao is bad because all of its effects are battle focused, which isn't that good anymore. I'm still waiting for Konami to print the anime-only card Super Heavy Samurai Warchief Heavy Strong, which protects 2 monsters on the field from being destroyed every turn. And that's all there is to this deck. You will notice that the extra deck is still not full. I will let you guys decide what other extra deck monsters you can add to this deck. But this deck has served me well for the Anti-Spell Festival event. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to the Battle Showcase. Thank you everyone for watching this video. If there are any casual decks you want me to cover, or if you want me to talk about any of my decks here in Master Duel, just write it down in the comments below. I'm currently testing an extra deck version of the virus deck in my previous video, and so far, it's going pretty good. So if you want to see that, just write it down in the comments below. This video took way longer to make than I thought, but I had fun making it, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it too. Thank you again, and take care everyone.